Many of my friends and families have already this kind of low time preference through the worldview we hold. I think Bitcoin fits in extremely well.
Amen.
Wow. Beautiful.
Lugano Plan B podcast presents Surviving Decentralization. Is Bitcoin compatible with all forms of government? With Joana Cotar, Samuel Kullmann, and Filip Karađorđević.
Could Bitcoin's open, accessible network spark a global political movement? And if so, how?
Well, I think, first of all, Bitcoin doesn't care about politics or politicians, but I think definitely that Bitcoin can have an influence on the political landscape. I mean, it's a symbol of freedom you have. It's about decentralization, giving the power back to the people, away from the state, away from the government. And I think that can spark a movement, especially in the Western countries, now that we see our liberty rights or freedom rights declining in Western countries. And that could definitely spark a movement towards more freedom. And I think in the developing countries, it's more about financial sovereignty, and it sparks movement there. I don't know how you see it.
No, I would like to say, well said. And I think, as Joana said, Bitcoin doesn't care about politicians, but politicians should care about Bitcoin. Yeah. And that's what we do at Jan 3, is we tell how Bitcoin can help them, but also how they can help their people. We sell them Bitcoin as a tool of freedom, or financial freedom, which is very important, as its core thesis is strong individual property rights. And I think you said the question was, does it work with every political movement, every political like socialism or communism? I don't think it worked with that. As we know, communism is based on centralized planning and central banks. So I think that's out of the question. Maybe some parts of socialism, yes. But I think Bitcoin works more with classical liberalism and libertarianism. So a reduced state and a way of actually finally taking the state away from the money, or the money away from the states, because both are entrenched right now and it's doing a lot of damage to our world.
Yeah, I agree, and sometimes, I mean, Bitcoin is a huge technological innovation. People have been sort of working on this project for maybe 30 years until it was finally realized by Satoshi Nakamoto. And Bitcoin has been compared to the invention of the printing press, which has democratized information, sort of breaking the monopoly of the Catholic Church in the medieval ages, and eventually leading to the separation of church and state. And Bitcoin can lead to the separation of state and money, which is at least as equally powerful and relevant for what is going on in our world today. So, and it breaks some of the power that authoritarian governments have, and thereby forces political systems, whether they are democracies or monarchies or whatever other system they may be, to be more in line with what the people actually want, because the people have more option, they have optionality, which they did not have before.
How do you tell politicians Bitcoin is good without mentioning loss, control, or increased freedom?
Well, I never start with the topic of freedom when I talk to my colleagues, to be honest. I will never tell them, you know what, I want you all be out of job and out of parliament. I want to give the power back to the people where it belongs. I think that's the wrong approach when you talk to politicians. I think you have to focus on other things, like in Germany, for example, we have an energy crisis at the moment because we got rid of nuclear, and now we have energy prices which are skyrocketing. And talking about Bitcoin mining and how it can help with our energy system, how it can stabilize grids, using excess energy we have, and so that we don't have to pay other countries to take away our excess energy we produce when we have a lot of wind or a lot of sun. That's something that people understand. Or when I talk to leftist politicians, I talk about the developing countries. I talk about the debanked, people who don't have access to banks or money, and how important it is for their economical sovereignty, for their financial freedom to have access to Bitcoin and to use it. Like the women in Afghanistan and use it to do business, or the people in developing countries in Africa who do that. So that's the approach I always take. And like Alex Gladstein said, it's the Trojan horse of freedom, Bitcoin. So the freedom always comes with it, but you have to take a different approach when you talk to politicians. That's just my opinion.
I echo that. You don't go to a politician and say, hey, I want to talk about Bitcoin. They're like, okay, goodbye. So you talk about how the incentive structures of Bitcoin can work for them and for their people. So one thing that was mentioned, that Joanna mentioned, was mining. And obviously, the FUD was that mining uses up too much electricity and it's wasteful and all that. But actually, when you actually tell the politician or tell the individual, if you just reverse the way you look at that, it's counterintuitive. Actually, that search for energy, for cheaper energy, drives the renewable energy markets. It also strengthens grids, because where energy is wasted, the Bitcoin miner can tap into that and strengthen a grid. It lowers CO2 emissions. So these oil rigs where they flare off the gas, instead of flaring it off, tap a Bitcoin mine into it, and you reduce the CO2. And on top of that, you're actually making money out of it. So that's the key, making money out of it, out of energy. So you sell them the story of energy is money. And that's quite powerful when they finally understand that. Then you can maybe talk about store of value and medium of exchange. I think that comes later. But I think right now the energy thing is very topical, because given the energy crises that we have in Europe and parts of the world, the price of energy is an issue for a lot of us. And I think Bitcoin can really help lower that.
I'm very thankful that Switzerland probably is quite a great example. It is an example, also an exception to the rule that it's difficult to talk to politicians about aspects of freedom, because the Swiss political system is quite unique in different ways. So we have federalism to a very high degree, autonomy of the cantons of our provinces. We have direct democracy to a very high degree, which is also quite unique in the world. And we have team government. So Switzerland is the only country in the world that has a team government that shares power equally amongst 7 ministers. And all of these aspects, they are more compatible with the Bitcoin values. So Switzerland is more decentralized. Politicians are less powerful. The people are empowered by direct democracy. And so my thesis is that Bitcoin standard, or hyper-Bitcoinization, or whatever you want to call this process, will incentivize governmental structures and political systems to become more like Switzerland, whether they want to or not, just because people are empowered by the Bitcoin technology. And when people are empowered, they carry more weight, their decisions, and people are more able to vote with their feet and to go to places where they prefer to be. So in theory, could there be a socialist system under Bitcoin standard? Yes, if everyone is voluntarily there and says, yes, we want this kind of socialism, and we use Bitcoin, then I guess it's possible. But socialism, as we know, heavily relies on force. So the question is, if this is just a theoretical example, it could very well be. But in theory, if the people want this,
in theory, I never understood how you can be a socialist and a Bitcoiner at the same time. Right. I mean, Bitcoin is about decentralization. Yeah. It's about ownership. It's about the individual, and communism, socialism is the exact opposite. It's about the collective. It's collective planning. It has nothing to do with freedom, liberty, or serenity. So
maybe some aspects of socialism, like free healthcare, free. It's not really free. You have to. That comes from taxes. Yeah. You don't get it free. Nothing's free. But that is the tax aspect of it is something that more socialist people are. Let's call it the liberals of today. They're not quite fully entrenched in communism, but they're kind of in between socialism and communism. Full communism, no chance. No. But some parts of socialism can be. But we as Bitcoiners probably not for that. Yeah.
I mean, the Swiss state has to ask its citizens every 10 years, may we tax you? Yeah. And a majority of the citizens say yes, you may tax us on the national level. And on the cantonal level, the citizens can also vote on the height of the taxes, on the tax law. You can make a referendum. So some degree of social aspect or so seems to be accepted in the majority of the population in Switzerland. But at the end, there's also a voluntary desire to live in this kind of a system. Yeah.
And because that Switzerland is an envy for the world, because it's the
Absolutely.
only democracy that I would say that actually works.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that could very well be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Because
they
of
ask
this
the people.
decentralization,
Mhm.
direct democracy, and the canton decentralization with the federal government, which really, who knows who the president of Switzerland is?
It changes every year,
Exactly,
so
so we never know.
even I would have to think about it from time to time.
Yeah, and they are not full-time politicians in Switzerland.
No.
They,
Well,
they have their jobs.
If you're in the government, yes.
Okay.
I mean, on the national level
Yeah.
and on the cantonal level, it's really a hard job, of course. But as a member of parliament, also on the national level, it's a part-time job. So people are still in their everyday
so they
job.
have real-world experience.
Yeah, exactly.
They do, and they don't have too much time to come up with new laws and mess things up.
Stupid ideas.
Yeah.
Bitcoin and Islam, is it compatible?
Well, I think it's already happening in Afghanistan, that there are initiatives out there to help women to be more included into the financial system, because it's very difficult for them to get paid through their normal currency. I forgot the name of the currency in Afghanistan, but they can do this with Bitcoin because that money can't be taken away from them, so they can have their own wallet and they can be paid with Bitcoin. And that's a start. That's a very good start, I think. And here's the thing about Islam. Islamic law understands what real money should be. And that fiat now is riba. It's, I think they call it riba.
Yeah, they do.
They don't like lending money with interest. That's a no-no for them. And Bitcoin is actually perfect money for them when you look at it how they want money. So now it's going to how conservative they are and how included women are into their society. I think that's another topic. But I think with Bitcoin, it gives a chance to women to get some inclusivity. And even if they do it in secret, they can still do it. And I think with time, maybe it will start to change the minds of some very conservative governments out there.
But that was the question I had. It's
Yeah.
what the women are doing now is secretly. It's not official in Afghanistan
Yes,
because they're not allowed to do business in
Exactly.
Afghanistan,
But
isn't it?
that's the problem we
Yeah.
have today. But I think with time, hopefully, we could just hope that conservatism, that level of Islamic conservatism, I'm not a religious expert, is going to be relaxed to some extent. You can see it already in Saudi Arabia that recently women are allowed to drive now. They can actually have jobs and all that. So I think in countries like Afghanistan, maybe there is hope that it could be relaxed there.
Actually, that's something that I'm also a bit worried about, that at some point, maybe very soon, the Arab sheikhs discover Bitcoin and get orange-pilled. Well, it's their right. Bitcoin is for everyone, so we cannot hinder them. But if certain ideologies get very much empowered by being early Bitcoin adopters, then I'm a bit worried about that. Not in the sense of that that Bitcoin is bad in this regard. It's just open, and so I find it very important that we fight for a good Bitcoin adoption in the countries that uphold certain values of liberty. I do not want Putin or Xi Jinping or the Arab sheikhs to be Bitcoin early adopters. I want the Swiss government, the Swiss National Bank, the cantons, third world countries like El Salvador, also Germany. It would be nice for them to get out of the mess they're in, to actually be Bitcoin early adopters, and Joana is doing an amazing work to promote that. So I think we need to realize as Bitcoiners that it's really about we need to get the freedom-oriented people on board as quickly as possible, because this is a real geopolitical issue with consequences for the next century. We should not mess this up, and I do not share the have fun staying poor attitude that is sort of common in the Bitcoin community, because sometimes it's just with almost everyone it takes time, and we need to be patient, and we need to onboard the right liberty-oriented people onto Bitcoin.
Are minarchies and citadels the new way?
I think it's a good test, or that we have test cases of free cities, of minarchist governmental forms, because anarcho-capitalism has not been tried yet in contrast to communism and socialism, which has been tried plenty of times and failed spectacularly every single time. So I really want to see this being tried out in the real world, so that we can see how it works, and we need free cities and citadels where this can be tried out. But it's not my main goal. I want, if you love your country, if you love the people around you, your region, your province, your nation state, then as a good patriot, you want your country to prosper and to be early in Bitcoin adoption, and not just flee your country when the shit hits the fan.
Well, that's the Swiss kind of perspective. Now, being from Germany and seeing the way Germany takes, and it goes downhill so fast. So I'm totally in favor of free cities and trying that out, trying citadels out. I mean, Bitcoin is about decentralization, and I think all these citadels and free cities are the same, about decentralization, pushing back the government, being as self-responsible as possible. If you have your own Bitcoin, your own keys, you're responsible for your Bitcoin. And when you live in these free cities, you're responsible for your actions. You don't have the government telling you what to do, but the government not helping you either. So I'm totally also in favor of trying these things out. I know that in Saxony there are some people trying it out, but it's always the human kind, the human being is always interferes a little bit. I don't know if it's possible, if humans are possible to organize ourselves, but I hope we are. I hope that these cities and these experiments turn out well. I will be the first one to move there. It's like a great idea.
Yeah, decentralization and citadels and smaller countries or areas, jurisdictions is probably the end goal of Bitcoin, but we're far away from that. But talking about what's happening now, I'd say that there are some citadels exist without Bitcoin, and that's monasteries. For example, Orthodox monasteries around, all around my part of the world, in the Balkans, and they kind of have their own little governance model there. I don't know what the law is on that, on how the governance works there, but they are self-sufficient, self-subsidizing. They grow their own food, vegetables, fruit, animals, all this, and I just think it's they go to the market to buy food. But I just think at some point I would like to orange pill a few of them, and that's a pet plan of mine. But I think yes, citadels and decentralization and free cities is a natural path. We've experimented with them before, and there's been some great successes. Like Singapore is essentially a free city, and that was extremely successful. But I believe there's Prospera happening in Honduras. That's having some troubles right now. Big mistake from the Honduras government. But we should be in support of free cities. We should be in support of communities that have freedom, forward-thinking goals that allow their citizens to be free, to be included and financially included. And yeah, I guess I'm rambling on, but I just would like to say that the end goal, 100 years from now, I see the world looking more like Switzerland.
What type of government is most compatible with Bitcoin's decentralized nature?
Well, I've been in politics for over 11 years now and over 7 years in the German parliament. And for me, it's as little government as possible. Is the best kind of government. Monarchy is a great idea because from my experience, political parties and politicians are rarely a part of a solution. They are mainly part of the problem. Yeah, having as little government as possible is the best kind of government.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've read Hans Adam II, Prince Hans Adam II. He's the reigning monarch of Liechtenstein. He's given over his administration powers to his son. But he's a thinker, he's an intellect, and he wrote a book which is The State of the Third Millennium. And to sum it up, basically, he says that countries, the state should act as a service provider and should be really stripped down to just providing services and be attracted to the citizens. It should be attracting citizens, not repelling them. And it was literally to be, as Joana pointed out, minimized to a very small number of people, and they are attracting people, and the government model on top of that, you'll have either a federal government or a monarchy that will be dealing more with like international relations, foreign policies and things like that. And the nitty-gritty will be done with a very small state, but done with direct democracy, self-determination. I see this model hopefully coming through in the next decade or two. I mean, I see people trying to push for this, but it's not easy when we have these electoral models out there that are not favouring smaller parties. Like in the UK, first past the post, it looks great on paper, but when you just look at the statistics, you don't need to be a statistician to realise that actually the smaller parties miss out. For example, the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, I know people don't like him, but he did get 4 million votes. That was not translated, popular vote that is, that was not translated to the number of seats he won. So I think there's a lot of restructuring that can be done out there, and I believe that Bitcoin can help with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree that actually the United Kingdom and United States and France, UK and France, former colonial powers, exported their political system, which is winner takes all, to huge parts of the world, especially to Africa, where it intermingles with a cultural thing of having a very, very strong leader. And so it sort of reinforces that tendency and produces a huge amount of conflict, unimaginable amount of conflict, because with 50.1%, one tribe can get all the power and the other tribe or tribes, they lose all the power. And this is not sustainable. And the Swiss form of government, where you have a team government, where power is shared equally in a team, I think is a very interesting approach to have more power sharing, which would lead to more political stabilities. Switzerland is probably the most politically stable country in the world. So I do think we have one of the best political systems. I also think it should be smaller. Also, the state in Switzerland should be smaller. But just the system itself, I think, is already almost as good as it can get.
Could Bitcoin's low time preference support the stability of monarchies?
Yes. No, it's something that many people don't actually realize when they see it on the surface. But actually, monarchy, and we're now going to talk about absolute monarchy, which doesn't get the best reputation because people start to think of it as dictatorship. But actually, no. Dictatorship has no succession planning, whereas a monarchy does have succession planning. A monarch, so how does this relate to Bitcoin? A monarchy and Bitcoin have two main things that are in synergy. That number one, I would say it's the low time preference aspect. And that means that we all know the low time preference aspect of Bitcoin is that it's money that can't be printed or inflated, and it creates a saving economy, which makes people value savings increase over time, so they're able to reinvest on themselves, in their family and their community, and it grows a stable, prosperous society, therefore civilization. Monarchy has the same idea with its governance model, that it has to look out for the generations ahead of itself. It wants to look a millennia away because it wants its family to be in that position in the millennia for now. You think, oh, that's power hungry. Well, no, actually, in order to do that, you've got to make sure you don't take much from the people. You've got to leave enough for your children's children and your children's children's for generations. So you want to tax the people as little as possible, which leads to the second subject, which is also one of the core theses of Bitcoin, which is very strong individual property rights. A good monarchy will have very strong individual property rights, meaning that its citizens have the ability to hold and store their own property without it being any controls over them from the monarch, from any leaders or anyone like that. So they are safe to knowing that their property is safe. And this means that they're least likely to rebel against the government. And if you take away those property rights, if you increase taxes too much, if you have capital controls, if you make their ability to hold property with too much taxes, then there's an opportunity that people will be upset and they might revolt, and then next thing you know, the monarchy is taken down. So with careful planning, a monarch has to take very decisions that are taking the long term in perspective. So I believe maybe the really good solution, and this is kind of experimental, would be a monarchy with an anarcho-capitalist society below. Then the monarchy is there as it holds tradition, and it holds religion, family values, foreign policy, with minimal state or no state, and having the people living under a Bitcoin, anarcho-capitalist Bitcoin society. And this will be done in a more decentralized fashion with smaller sort of populations around the world. And you can maybe talk about incorporating some direct democracies here and there. I mean, this is all theoretical and, you know.
Never thought about a monarchy the way you just described it. Very interesting.
I didn't properly know this until I actually learned about Bitcoin. And then it's thanks to, Bitcoin and its low time preference, and I realized actually that's how monarchy works. And number one thing that both of them are really, the reason why Bitcoin works so well is because it's the absolute finest apex asset, individual property. No one can, it's unconfiscatable, it's indestructible, it's uncensorable, and it's durable, and that's how a monarchy should be thinking about itself and not taking from its people. A dictatorship, on the other hand, doesn't have succession planning, takes from its people, is authoritarian, and takes freedoms away because it wants to control. A monarchy should not be about control, it should be about freedom.
Well, I still like the direct democracy of Switzerland, but I'm also intrigued. I think, well, let the people decide. If the people want a monarchy, well, the question is who would be the monarch, and switching from a republic or democracy to a monarchy, the process would be maybe a bit challenging unless there's like a very clear candidate for the monarch and then with his successors.
Here's the issue is that, right, if there was a transition, for example, Serbia, it would be a constitutional monarchy. You will still have the issues of the democracy that you have in state. I would envision maybe a halfway goal would be having the monarch to have a bit more power and decision-making over the democracy as a balance of check, and reducing the size of the state, and the monarch should be more in charge of foreign policy, a bit like Switzerland. And you have a combination of Liechtenstein's self-determination and Switzerland's direct democracy and decentralization of cantons with an overarching federal government, but in this case it will be an overarching monarchy gluing it all together.
And with the right to secession, I think that would be a very, very interesting aspect, which again gives power to the people, in case the monarch becomes crazy or so.
And that's the beginning stage, hopefully. Well, and then later on, maybe you get rid of the power structure completely, and you just have anarcho-capitalism, and we'll be happy forever.
Or maybe the Bitcoin citadels in 50 years, maybe they will be like developing into natural monarchical structures or whatever.
I just don't see democracy lasting the long term. Descartes, who was in the 17th century French philosopher, who was a big proponent for democracy, he said that democracy wasn't going to work beyond like 1 million people. It was not, you can't have over 1 million people deciding the fate of its population. You're always going to have an uninformed majority. And when you have an uninformed majority, the informed minority are always going to be in charge, and then that leads to the deterioration of individual rights, freedoms, and private property.
And that's actually what we're seeing now.
Correct.
But
when you talk to it doesn't matter to whom you talk about from Western countries. We all have the same problems.
Exactly.
All democracies have the same problems
in
at the
different
moment.
shapes and forms,
And
but all with the same sort of theme.
The democracy is failing right now, and I think we're all looking for the solution. How can we change the system? And Bitcoin was something where I said, well, that's a solution. I was always looking for a solution, and when I discovered Bitcoin, I said, that's a solution. You can apply it to politics, to so many topics. That's why it's so interesting to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let me counter that a little bit, because through the direct democracy we have in Switzerland, it actually relies on a phenomenon called crowd intelligence, that like a crowd of not experts is in some cases able to determine something better than a single expert. So I think it is, in Switzerland people would vote against having 2 more weeks of paid holiday because the citizens are they would vote by 2/3 margin against it, because they are trained enough through having more than 100 years of direct democracy to think about also long-term consequences, like who will pay for this and how will this affect my job security and the economic situation of Switzerland. So Yeah, so I'll have to defend our system a
Yeah,
little bit here,
but you have a special kind of
it's-
democracy.
yes, yes.
Yeah, and you have direct democracy.
Yeah.
That's something
Yeah.
we're missing.
Yes.
How long has it been functioning for? It's since the 12th century, isn't it?
Well,
The
I mean,
13th.
it's. I think it was a French philosopher in the 18th century who said, "Well, look at the Swiss people regulating affairs of state under an oak, always acting wisely. How can we not scorn the ingenious methods of wrecking a country like other countries have?" I don't know, remember the exact quote, but yeah, we had like forms of direct democracy through having very, very small cantons or regions, sort of growing together naturally over the centuries. And the modern Swiss state was founded in 1848, and we got the referendum right on the national level in 1874, and the right to the popular initiative to suggest an amendment to the Swiss constitution in 1891, and then proportional representation in 1919, which also helped the smaller parties and prevented things from going the way the USA is going right now. So, yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. Yeah, we should have more time.
Could Bitcoin's decentralization challenge or strengthen democracies and republics?
I think it can do both. I think it can strengthen the system we're living in. If you look at democracies, the values you have, it's like the personal freedom you have and the self-responsibility. I think that Bitcoin can strengthen that, but I think Bitcoin can also be a struggle for a lot of people, and especially for governments. If they're used to printing money to solving the problem, it will be a huge problem and struggle for democracies and governments if you implement Bitcoin.
I think it's going to be very difficult but this is what we're here, people like yourselves, is teaching politicians about the benefits of Bitcoin and smaller government at the end of the day. That the democratic cycles that we have, 4 or 5 years cycles, actually makes people think in the short term. If we have, and that is what is accentuated if you have money and state entrenched with each other. If you take the money away from state, then that short-termism gets reduced. Not reduced, it gets elongated, so people start to think more about the long term, I guess. Because all of a sudden you don't have the magic printer where you can push a button and make voters happy. When you take that magic button away, that magic printer away, then I think that will do a lot of correction, but it's going to be tough for people to when they actually feel that correction. And I think we're starting to see some of this play out already in like Argentina with Milei. I think the only way you can actually solve what we have today is to rip the Band-Aid off, experience a couple of years of austerity, and then we get back to where we should be.
But also, sorry, if you only have 21 million Bitcoin, and you have to think about on what you're spending it,
Yep.
that will change your way of thinking.
Responsibility.
Exactly.
In my environment, I've been able to orange pill several hundred people, and many Bitcoiners ask me, how do you do it? And I believe it has got something to do with that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I'm in many networks with churches, with people who really believe in Bible and in God. And if you really believe in God and what the Bible says, then you think of eternity. And thinking of eternity is extremely low time preference, because you see this life here on earth, this physical earth, just as a preparation, in a way, as a test for the afterlife, which is eternity. And so it's like a drop in the ocean, this time we have here on earth compared to eternity. And if I do it right, like if I really live according to the values I have as a Christian, then I try to think of how do my consequences here, what I do on earth, affect eternity. And so, because many of my friends and families have already this kind of low time preference through the worldview we hold, I think Bitcoin fits in extremely well.
Amen.
Wow. Beautiful.